What if I told you that General Motors once built a truck so big it felt more like a military vehicle than something you'd drive to the store? This was a 6,400-pound beast that could tow your boat, intimidate your neighbors, and still keep your latte warm. That truck was the Hummer H2 SUT, and let me tell you, this thing was engineered like a Frankenstein experiment. So how did a truck this ridiculous even get built? And why did it vanish almost as fast as it arrived? Well, to find out, we have to go back to the early 2000s when bigger was better and gas was cheap. But General Motors had a problem. They had this beast of a machine called the Hummer H1. Sure, it was tough as nails and a status symbol for badasses. But here's the thing. The H1 was a dinosaur. Too wide, too loud, too expensive. Not only that, but it was about as practical as a tank in a grocery store parking lot. So GM made a bold move. They decided on something that still looked like it could crush a brick wall, but was actually comfortable enough to pick the kids up from school. So, in 2002, they rolled out the Hummer H2. Sure, it still had that squared-off apocalyptic look, but under the hood it was built on a more civilized GM platform. So what was the goal? Well, GM wanted you to still feel like a badass, but now with cup holders. And then they let journalists poke around early versions to create a buzz. People were talking, and at first it worked. Sales were strong. The H2 was a hit with everyone. But the fun wouldn't last for too long. Why? Gas prices. They crept up and reality set in. By 2004, sales of the H2 SUV dropped 20%. The market was starting to lose interest, and that put GM in a corner. Either let the Hummer brand fade or find a way to reignite the fire. So what did GM do? Well, they doubled down. Instead of retreating, they pushed forward with something new. The H2 SUT, a truck bed, a midgate, all the attitude of the original H2, but now with utility. You could haul lumber in the back and still feel like you were leading a convoy into battle. They even borrowed clever ideas from the Chevy Avalanche and the Escalade. Basically, they told the world, this isn't just a toy, it's a tool. And it wasn't just about trucks. It was about a lifestyle, a symbol, a last hurrah for American excess before the tides of fuel efficiency came crashing in. Now, here's where things got real. You don't just slap a pickup bed onto a military SUV and call it a day. Nope. GM knew they were building a monster, not just in looks, but in guts. And because of that, they needed a frame that could handle punishment without riding like a dump truck. But why does that even matter? Well, because this was a 6,400-pound beast. It was built to tow nearly 7,000 pounds, yet still feel like you were cruising down the highway in a throne. So that three-piece chassis wasn't just smart engineering, it was a statement. So what did they do? They got clever. The H2 SUT wasn't built on any regular truck frames. Instead, it used something called a multi-section backbone. They started with the 2500 series up front for strength, and then the 1500 series in the back for ride quality, and finally a brand new fully boxed middle section to support the midgate without flexing like a soda can. But of course, all that brawn needed a beating heart, and in 2005, the H2 SUT got stronger. GM dropped in their 6-liter V8. Sure, 325 horses was not a race car by any means, but that wasn't the point. The SUT could tow your boat, your trailer, maybe even your ego, all without breaking a sweat. And sure, the numbers weren't exactly lighting up the drag strip. 0 to 60 in just under 10 seconds wasn't fast, but it was confident, not flashy, just formidable. But let's be honest, this beast was heavy, and it drank fuel like it was going out of style, and no amount of V8 rumble could fully hide that curb weight. But that's not why guys bought it. They bought it because it felt like armor. Because when you turned to the key and that V8 growled to life, it didn't matter how fast you were going. You felt untouchable. Take a look yourself at the front. It looked like it had just rolled off a military convoy. All squared up menace and that unmistakable Hummer grill that practically barked at the other cars. But then came the tricky part. How do you add a pickup bed without making it look like a Frankenstein experiment? The solution was so clever, instead of just slicing off the back of the SUV, GM's engineers built a bed that could expand on command, thanks to the midgate system. This wasn't some grocery getter. It was a vehicle for people who wanted to throw a kayak in the back and drive straight through the river to get there. And the proportions, let's just say, subtlety wasn't invited to this party. At over 81 inches wide, the H2 SUT didn't just sit in a lane, it owned it. Seeing this thing at a red light is always a humbling experience. Now here's the part that caught a lot of people off guard. The H2 SUT wasn't just tough on the outside, it was surprisingly refined inside, because let's face it, this wasn't just built for crawling over rocks. It was for lawyers, contractors, and CEOs. So GM loaded it up, tri-zone climate control, heated seats, leather everywhere, and yeah, it had tech, satellite radio, everything you needed to convince your spouse this was technically a luxury vehicle. But the H2 SUT wasn't trying to be everything to everyone. It was built for the guy who wanted a truck that looked like it could survive the apocalypse, yet still had heated seats. It wasn't polite, but it was unforgettable. So what happened next? Well, GM threw everything at it, premium price, premium features. The adventure package started north of $52,000. That was Cadillac Escalade money. But for buyers who wanted to feel like a one-man convoy, it was worth every penny. This truck was way ahead of its time. It had versatility, presence, and a sense of fun that many trucks still lack today. But then the tide turned. Gas prices started climbing fast. Suddenly, driving a 6,400-pound beast didn't feel quite so patriotic. GM had bet on brawn in a world that was rapidly downsizing. And no matter how cool the midgate was, the SUT was caught in the wrong story at the wrong time. By the time the last H2 SUT rolled off the line in 2009, it was the end of an era. Because this truck was never built for compromise. It was designed during a time when America celebrated more size, more presence, more attitude, and the SUT delivered all of it unapologetically. But let's be clear for a second. The SUT didn't fail because it was a bad truck. It failed because it was a bold idea in a world that suddenly got nervous about bold ideas. It was a rolling contradiction, a vehicle born to conquer, yet brought down by a shifting culture it never tried to please. And that's why it still matters. You may never see one again at a dealership, but in the minds of those who lived it, the H2 SUT lives on, not just as a truck, as a legend.